Anna had the kind of mind people called sharp when they wanted to sound polite about how intimidating she was. Her spreadsheets were spotless, her forecasts were precise, and her charts looked like they'd been built by someone who didn't just understand numbers, but respected them. Every line connected. Every figure made sense. Every recommendation was backed by data so solid you could practically stand on it. And yet, meeting after meeting, her ideas kept drifting off the table. It wasn't that her bosses were stupid. Quite the opposite. They were experienced, busy, and very good at sounding like they were paying attention. They nodded at the right moments. They asked decent questions. One of them even said, "Great work, Anna," in that tone people use when they mean, "We'll think about it later," which usually means never. Anna would leave the room with that familiar mix of frustration and disbelief. How could something so clear on paper become so invisible in conversation? Then one afternoon, after another polished presentation had been met with polite silence, her boss leaned back in his chair and said, "I'm not sure this is landing. Can you make me care about it?" That was the moment. Anna didn't need better data. She needed a different doorway into the human mind. Because this is the strange thing about us. A room full of intelligent people can ignore a perfect spreadsheet, but they'll lean in when someone starts with, "Let me tell you what happened." Suddenly, eyes lift, shoulders settle, phones disappear. Something in the room changes. Why? Because the brain doesn't just process stories. It steps into them. When we hear a story, different parts of the brain start lighting up together. The areas that handle language wake up, of course, but so do the parts that deal with sight, sound, touch, and movement. If a character walks through rain, your brain can almost feel the cold on your skin. If someone slams a door, you tense up before you even realize it. And when emotion enters the picture, the effect gets stronger still. There's even research suggesting storytelling can trigger oxytocin, the chemical linked to empathy and trust. In other words, a good story doesn't just inform us. It connects us. It makes us feel something about the information. And once that happens, memory changes too. People don't just remember the facts. They remember the feeling, the person, the moment. Which is why a well-told story can stick in the mind far longer than isolated data. Sometimes, astonishingly, up to 22 times more. So Anna did something different. She stopped leading with a spreadsheet and started with a person, a problem, a choice, a consequence. And what happened next in that room was not what anyone expected. Anna had done everything right, at least on paper. Her spreadsheet was clean, the numbers were solid, the charts were sharp enough to cut glass, and the logic was impossible to argue with. She walked into the meeting room with that quiet confidence you get when you know your work is strong. But the room didn't move. A few polite nods, a couple of distracted glances at phones, and then the conversation drifted elsewhere, as if her evidence had been gently placed on the table and forgotten. Then, a week later, a different colleague stood up with barely any data at all. No polished dashboard. No elegant breakdown. Just a simple story about a customer, a late-night phone call, and the moment a small mistake nearly cost the company a loyal client. Suddenly, everyone was listening. Heads lifted. People leaned forward. Someone who had been checking emails closed their laptop. The same room that had treated Anna's facts like background noise was now fully awake. That's the strange power of storytelling. It doesn't just inform us. It recruits us. When a story is good, the brain doesn't file it away in one neat little corner. It lights up like a city at dusk, pulling in the parts that handle sight, sound, movement, emotion, and meaning. If a character runs, parts of your motor system respond as though you can feel the motion. If a scene is tense, your body starts to react before you've even had time to think about it. In other words, your brain doesn't watch a story from a distance. It steps inside it, and that's why stories stick. Facts can be accurate, even essential, but they often arrive like isolated bricks. A story connects those bricks into a house. It gives the mind a place to walk around in. It adds tension, rhythm, cause and effect. It gives us someone to care about, something to lose, and a reason to keep going. That's also where the emotional chemistry comes in. When we hear a story that makes us care, the brain can release oxytocin, the same chemical linked to trust and empathy. In plain English, a good story doesn't just say, here's the point. It makes us feel why the point matters. That's why Anna's next attempt looked completely different. She stopped opening with charts and started with a person. A frustrated customer. A real problem. A clear struggle. The data was still there, of course, but now it had a heartbeat. Her managers weren't being asked to admire numbers. They were being invited into a journey. And once you see that, you start noticing it everywhere. In speeches, in sales, in teaching, even in the way people remember a difficult lesson from years ago. A story can be remembered up to 22 times more than a standalone fact, which is a ridiculous advantage when you're trying to persuade, explain, or inspire. But here's the part that really changes the game. Not all stories work equally well. There's a deeper structure behind the ones that grab us instantly, and Anna was about to discover it. By the time Anna stepped into the boardroom again, she wasn't carrying another spreadsheet to defend. She was carrying a story. The room looked the same as before. Polished table, iced water untouched, laptops half open, faces already braced for another data-heavy briefing. But this time, Anna didn't start with percentages. She started with a person, a client, a problem, a moment of frustration that everyone in the room could picture without trying. And almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. One by one, heads lifted. Pens stopped moving. The people who used to glance at their phones were now looking right at her, because the numbers had finally been given a pulse. They weren't just statistics anymore. They were consequences. They were stakes. They were human. And that's the quiet power of storytelling. It doesn't just inform the brain. It recruits it. It pulls in emotion, memory, imagination, even the body's sense of movement and action, until the listener isn't merely hearing ideas, they're experiencing them. That's why stories can make a dry argument feel urgent, and why a well-told example can outlast 100 bullet points. The brain remembers what it feels, and stories are built to make us feel. Anna could see it happening in real time. The CFO, who had dismissed her chart last week, leaned forward and said, "So if we don't act now, this client walks?" And Anna nodded. That one question was worth more than any slide she'd ever made, because suddenly the issue was no longer abstract. It had become real. That's the part most people miss when they try to persuade others. They think they need more information when what they really need is a path, a beginning, a struggle, a turning point, a payoff. That's why the hero's journey works so well. It mirrors the way we naturally make sense of change. Someone faces a challenge, moves through uncertainty, learns something, and comes back transformed. It's simple, but it's powerful because it feels true. And here's the part that makes all the difference. The story can't just be about the hero winning. It has to show what's at risk if they don't. That tension is what makes people care. Anna's bosses cared now, not because the facts changed, but because the meaning did. She had turned data into a journey, and the room had followed her all the way through it. So the next time you're trying to explain an idea, persuade a team, or get someone to really listen, ask yourself this. Are you giving them information, or are you giving them a story they can step into? If that clicked for you, you'll probably want to hear how to build that kind of message from the ground up.